So I want to ask, because for most people, if you were to be a basketball player,
Right.
when you were young, you would see either Michael Jordan play, you would see
Well,
LeBron.
when I was young, when I was really young, it wasn't Michael Jordan. It was Dr. J, man. So I'm going way back. I'm an old man.
So we were a hooper. We would see one of our favorite basketball
Right.
players, and it would be the first impression of what a great player was.
Right.
But for the direction that you went into,
Right.
what was your first time seeing a representation of what a great leader was?
Oh, that's interesting. So, you know, I was born in 1961. And so my earliest memories are tied to the civil rights movement. And obviously Dr. King, Malcolm X, those were prominent leaders. John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy. But the folks I think who inspired me the most, because I could relate to them, were the grassroots civil rights leaders. You know, people who were working with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Freedom Riders. You know, most of these, they were kids. I mean, they were, you know, college students, people like John Lewis, and they would go and sit in lunch counters, and they're taking abuse, but they're showing people how dehumanizing Jim Crow was. You know, they're riding buses, and sometimes they're getting beat up. In some cases, some died. They're knocking on doors in communities, trying to register people to vote. And I remember watching that, and I said to myself, you know what? To see young people take on those kinds of responsibilities and put themselves on the line on behalf of justice and equality and freedom, that was inspiring to me, and I could relate to it, right? You know, you look at somebody like JFK or Dr. King, you're all like, well, I don't know if I'm gonna be all that. But what I know I can do is I can march. I know I can, you know, try to register people to vote. And so that's how I ended up, when I got out of college, I decided to become a community organizer. And that's how I moved to Chicago, was to work in low-income communities, trying to, you know, see if I can give them a lift and work with local leaders, community leaders, just to try to make things a little bit better in those local areas, you know, and that's really what inspired me initially. It wasn't until later that I said, all right, well, maybe I'll try to run for office, but that wasn't my initial inspiration.
Yeah. One thing that I admire is your self-belief.
Yeah.
For you to come as far as you've came,
Right.
you've had to believe that anything was possible for your life. I want to ask you, where does your self-belief come from? Was this something you were born with, or may have it been something that Miss Hefty instilled in you, your fifth grade teacher?
Okay, so you did your homework. Miss Hefty was a great fifth grade teacher, one of my favorites. And I had lived overseas for a couple of years. I'd moved back, and she was somebody who told me that my heritage, you know, being half Kenyan, was something to be proud of, because she had worked in Kenya. There were a bunch of teachers, coaches, people like that, but you know, my biggest influence was my mother. You know, she was a single mom, had me when she was very young. She was 18 when she had me. And you know, she just always let me know that, you know, number one, nobody is better than you, and nobody's worse than you. You know, you treat everybody with respect. And she also told me that, you know, you've got the skills, if you put your mind to it, to do meaningful things, as long as you work hard and you're accountable. And she gave me a lot of love. And, you know, now my father wasn't around. And so, you know, I'm not unusual in that sense. I didn't really know my father. I met him once when I was 10, and I really was with him for about a month, and that was it. And so for a young Black teenager who didn't know his dad very well, I won't lie to you, when I was a teenager, I was, you know, getting into some stuff. Spent a bunch of time. I loved basketball, liked chasing girls, got high. Didn't apply myself that hard in school, but that foundation that my mother had laid, that sense of responsibility, she taught me to love books. And she gave me confidence that if I did apply myself, I could get things done. So that by the time I'm 19, 20, you know, I think some of the anger about my father not being around, some of my insecurities about I wasn't mean to be a responsible person, wasn't mean to be a black man in America. A lot of those issues I began to get more serious about and, you know, took more ownership over my life. And then, you know, then you just learn from experience, right? You know, what gives you confidence is you try things. Sometimes you fail, but sometimes you succeed.
Right.
And you can learn from both, right? When you succeed, you go, okay, I got that done because I was focused, I put in the work. When you fail, you realize I'll survive it. You know, it's like I can bounce back, and that gives you confidence. And so I think my mother's values set me on the right direction. But then what happens is that you just start testing out those values in the world, and you see, you know, what kind of impact you can have. And
that's right.
You get a little more impact. You decide, all right, well, let me try, and you just kind of go from there.
Yeah, I love that you said that things don't always go our way.
They definitely
There's going to be a point where we have to face adversity.
That's exactly right.
For you, I'm wondering, what was your biggest loss, and what did you learn from that?
Well, look, I mean, I've made so many mistakes. When I was a community organizer, I thought I was going to set the world on fire, and I did some really, you know, useful things in the community on the south side of Chicago where I was working. But the truth is that for all the work I did there, you know, I didn't end poverty in those communities. You know, we might get a job training center started, but there was still a lot of unemployment. You know, we might get a after-school program for kids set up, but you know, there were still a lot of schools where kids weren't doing well. And in politics, you know, at first I ran for the state senate, which is kind of the state legislature. But my first race where I ran for a congressional office, man, I got whooped. I ran against this guy, Bobby Rush, and he was really well known, and nobody really knew me. I was kind of an up and comer. People were all like, wait your turn. I was like, you know, I'm gonna try this out. And I got beat by, I don't know, 25 points or something. I mean, it was a spanking.
Yeah.
But that's an example of me realizing, all right, I didn't do my homework. I didn't think through. It wasn't the right race to run. And yet I learned a lot about how to present myself with other people, you know, how to build coalitions. And I realized, you know, I can survive a loss and bounce back. And so the next race I ran was for the U.S. Senate. I ended up winning that, spoke at the Democratic National Convention. And so it was only 2 years after I had lost that bad race that I ended up, you know, speaking to the entire country, which tells you, you know, you don't always know if you don't try what you might be able to accomplish.
You know, you'll miss every shot you don't take.
You got to take the shot.